Time viewers of Witty CFB know how I feel about college football playoff expansion, conference realignment, all that good stuff. It's just this report that came out with Ross Dellenger regarding some meetings that the Big Ten and the SEC have had regarding college football playoff expansion. If you're a college football fan just like me, I think you have to be a little bit afraid of the sport's future. 27 of the past 33 national championships have either been from the Big Ten or the SEC. They already get a number of the revenues, and it just seems like one of those things where I think you can only just have so much more power. And really what the big kicker about all of this, not anything else. I mean, let's think about it. I mean, you already have a huge deal with Fox. That's what the Big Ten has. ESPN has a big deal with the SEC, and that's why, by the way, that Chris Fowler and Herb Heardstreet only do SEC games, because that it's definitely always a coincidence when it's like, oh, why is Herb Heardstreet doing Arkansas versus LSU on Saturday night? There's no coincidence there. But the big storyline is the 16-team playoff, and I think all of us can agree that you would be naive to think that the 12-team playoff was going to be a long-term viable solution. And like I said before, I would be totally okay if it was only a 2-team playoff again, like the BCS model. Even the 4-team playoff was fine. No matter what scenario you're going to have, somebody's always going to feel like they're going to get screwed, no matter what. I mean, you go back when it was a 4-team playoff and Florida State, didn't get in. I think they did get screwed. But at the same time, it's one of those things where some team is always going to get left out no matter what you do. So when you continue to add on more of these teams, all it does is dilute the product. And I can even just give a similar comparison with NASCAR, for example. In NASCAR, all it should be is that whoever has the most points at the end of the year should win the championship. Instead, they have all this bullshit competition cautions and things like that too that ultimately ruin the product because people don't want these complex, convoluted scenarios. And that's exactly the trajectory that college football is starting to get into. And quite frankly, it should be something that really should make everybody nervous. And they're going to talk about how maybe a 14-team playoff might be in there too. But at the same time, 12 and 16 is just a lot cleaner, quite frankly. And in terms of the actual playoff format right now, like I said, I think for the most part, it's a great model. The only thing that has to be tweaked about it is that the conference champions all should get in. That part of it is right. The only thing that is wrong with the current college football playoff model right now is that the conference champions just shouldn't be ranked 1 to 5. They should be ranked based on the rankings from the very last week of the year. So obviously Oregon would be number 1. And then let's say Boise State is ranked number 17, for example. And based off of that, they would be the 12th seed, for example. I don't know. I don't have it right in front of me. But to me, that would be the example. So instead of them just simply being 1 to 5, it should just be, hey, you just get into the college football playoff and that's it. And you eliminate the whole part of the conference championships not mattering, because if you win your conference, you get in. It's that simple. That's exactly what they do in college basketball. You win your conference and you get in, or you get in that large bid. That's the way it is. And now with the 16-team playoff, essentially what they're proposing is that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get the majority of the bids by default. And I have a number of issues with this. Paul Feinbaum and Heather Donich, they said this on their report too, and they've analyzed this and whatnot too. But the reality is that there's no place in college football for there to be automatic bids. I don't care how big the SEC is. I don't care how big the Big Ten is. I don't care how much revenue that they bring in. It's just wrong to sit there and say that these teams should just get automatic bids just by default. And aside from just it being wrong in general, if I'm one of those teams who are in the outside top 3 or 4, like an Ole Miss, for example, or an Auburn, one of those teams that I know can get a bid, or even in Iowa, why would I sit there and schedule tough non-conference games every year? What I would sit there and do is I'm going to sit there and schedule cupcake teams every single time. So for the SEC, you're going to schedule 4 cupcake non-conference games and just stack up that record so that you just have one of the top 4 records in, and you get in, and that's it. It essentially makes conference champions not really matter anymore, because you're going to get the conference championship week, and if both teams are ready in the playoff, they're going to sit there and not play any of their starters. Exactly what happens in the NFL at the last week of the year when they know that they're in the playoff. It's sort of what happens with the bowl games, for example, where some of the kids will sit out if they're transferring, for example. That's the situation that we're going to start getting to, which is ironic, quite frankly, because we sit here and we preach player safety. We sit here and talk about all these different rules that are supposed to positively impact the kids and everything. Yet all we're doing is going around and adding more games to the calendar, making things more convoluted than they need to be, and just making everything more of a monopoly than it's ever been before. Even 10 years ago, there were 5 conferences that were relatively even. Now, granted, you can always argue that the Big Ten and the SEC have always been the de facto giants of college football, and yes, they have. However, I didn't go into every season thinking it was always going to be the SEC or the Big Ten. There were years where I certainly thought the Pac-12 could win it. There were years where I thought the ACC and Clemson would win it. So it just goes to show that in this model, we're just going to continue seeing this evolution of college football kind of turning into almost a monopoly, which makes you kind of think to yourself, okay, if a 16-team playoff is next, then what's stopping them from creating a super league, for example, where the SEC and the Big Ten decide, hey, we don't need the Northwesterns of the world. We don't need the Wisconsins of the world. We'll sit here and get all the top schools to all band together, and we'll just create our own college football league and share all the money for ourselves. That's eventually what I think is going to happen, and I pray to God that it doesn't. But at the same time, when you read these reports and read these models, you just have to sit there and say to yourself that this is going to happen eventually, whether we like it or not. And I know that these are all just meetings, and Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey, and they're gonna sit there and not give much away. They're gonna sit there and deflect and do all those things. However, we're at a point in time where it's just going to become a bigger problem. Now, just to kind of set the stage in terms of what this 16-team playoff would look like, if this were to go through according to the format that they want to do it in, number 1 Oregon, who went 12-0, by the way, would have to sit there and play number 22 Army. Imagine that scenario. Number 1 Oregon versus Army. And granted, I give Army all the credit in the world for what they've done. I think Jeff Monken is a phenomenal coach for what he's done over the 10 plus seasons that he's done there. However, if I'm Oregon and I go 12-0 and I do everything right, I win all my conference games, I win my conference, I do what I have to do, and then my reward is having to go play Army. That's crazy. You're literally incentivized to not win your games as much, because now what coaches are going to start doing, and Lane Kiffin's even mentioned this last offseason, is that head coaches are going to start sitting there along with their scouting departments and everything too, is they're going to start mapping out what exactly the best scenario is going to be in this expanded playoff format. They're going to sit there and say, okay, instead of winning my conference and being number 1, which is what the model always should be for any given sport, the new model is going to be, well, mathematically speaking, if we're ranked 4 or 5, we're going to go ahead and play this group of 5 school instead of having to go play Alabama or Ole Miss or something who's an at-large team. That's eventually what's going to happen, where a lot of these teams are going to start strategically sitting there and saying, oh, well, we're going to play really tough this game, and then we're not going to play tough versus certain other games. And quite frankly, it's a slap in the face to the fans in general, given that we're supposed to all turn a blind eye and pretend like this is a great idea. Now, granted, yes, it does help support some of the smaller schools. And I'm all for supporting the smaller schools. You can go back and look at all my videos, and I cover a number of small programs on this show. I've done videos on Northwestern, on Duke, on Wake Forest. So it's not like I don't sit here and cover the programs that I don't think get enough spotlight. However, we all have to sit there and say to ourselves too that at the end of the day, being the champion of college football has to mean something. And in order for you to get there, yeah, you should be flawless, quite frankly. You should be 12-0. You should be 11-1, or even a 10-2, granted. But at the same time, it's just you're just rewarding teams for being mediocre. And quite frankly, you're diluting the product. That's the number one issue. We are in a world now where it's okay for certain teams to not necessarily play the toughest schedules in the world anymore. And granted, I did an episode on Clemson and Notre Dame, and it's great that they have that scheduling agreement. But as you continue to expand the playoff and more money is coming in from these different networks, the greater the issue is going to become. And I'm just here to tell you that it's just going to become a bigger problem. I already think the 12-team playoff could work. I think it did work this season, aside from the conference champions being the first top 5 seeds. But at the same time, ultimately, it's just going to be a power struggle because the ACC and the Big 12 can only do so much. And I think Jim Phillips understands that too. He even said in a press conference a couple weeks ago that you're going to get some resistance from these smaller programs too. And it's going to eventually get to a point where the Big 10 and the SEC are going to disband together and say, hey, this is the way we're going to do it. And if you guys don't want to do it that way, then we're just going to take our ball and go home. And I hate to be pessimistic about the sport that I love and that I'm passionate about, but for all of you college football fans, I think this is something that's incredibly concerning. And I think it's something that's only going to make the product worse as you get into this era of college football where more people are watching now than ever, which is amazing. But at the same time, when you compare it to all the different ways that they can format this, it's just devastating to see.